I used to work as a senior systems administrator for a mid-sized logistics firm. I loved the job. The pay was great, and my team was incredible. The only dark cloud over the entire company was my direct manager, Greg. Greg was a classic corporate parasite. He didn't understand the technology we managed. He constantly took credit for our team's late-night infrastructure deployments, and he ruled with pure intimidation. For 2 years, I tolerated it because our chief technology officer, David, knew my worth. David had explicitly pulled me aside and told me that when he moved up to the executive board next year, I was his top choice to take over the department. Then, David unexpectedly suffered a health scare and took an immediate, permanent retirement. The board, panicking to fill the gap, promoted Greg to interim CTO. The moment Greg stepped into David's old office, his mask completely came off. He realized that if I got promoted to his old manager role, I would easily expose the fact that he hadn't actually done any real work for the past 24 months. Greg decided his best defense was an aggressive offense. He began a systematic campaign to make my life a living hell. He started buried alive micromanagement schemes, demanded daily 6 a.m. status reports, and began leaving a paper trail of completely fabricated performance issues to block my upcoming promotion. The final straw came during a massive company-wide server migration. I stayed up for 36 hours straight, ensuring the transition went flawlessly. On Monday morning, Greg called an all-hands meeting. In front of the entire executive board, he presented my architecture slides with his name slapped on the cover page. When I subtly tried to clarify a technical question a board member asked, Greg cut me off, laughed, and said, "Let's leave the big picture thinking to the executives, shall we?" That was the exact second I stopped being a loyal employee and decided to ruin him. To execute my plan, I didn't need to break any rules. I just needed to look closely at our employment contracts. Our logistics network relied on a highly customized legacy database framework that kept track of global shipping routes, inventory manifests, and client billing. It was an absolute monster of a system that I spent the last 3 years single-handedly building, optimizing, and securing. Because the company was cheap when they hired me, my employment contract contained a highly unusual, outdated clause regarding intellectual property. It stated that any foundational software code or architectural frameworks developed entirely outside of standard working hours on personal equipment remained the sole intellectual property of the creator, licensed exclusively to the company only during the duration of their employment. I checked my system logs. Nearly 70% of the core database optimization scripts, security protocols, and automated recovery tools had been coded by me at home, on my personal laptop. During weekend emergencies over the last 3 years, every single one of those emergencies was documented via time-stamped emails from Greg begging me to fix the system after hours. I spent the next 2 weeks quietly preparing. I didn't slow down my work performance. In fact, I became the most agreeable employee Greg had ever seen. I smiled, accepted his public insults, and handed him beautifully formatted reports that he could easily pass off as his own. While Greg was busy soaking up unearned praise from the CEO, I was compiling a massive encrypted external hard drive. It contained every email, every text message, every time-stamped code commit, and an ironclad legal log detailing exactly which parts of the company's core infrastructure belonged exclusively to me. Next, I quietly reached out to our primary competitor. They had been trying to headhunt me for a year. I told them I was ready to jump ship, but on one condition. I wanted a 30% salary increase and a written guarantee that my new team would be entirely remote. They sent over the official offer letter within 6 hours. I signed it immediately, setting my start date for exactly 3 weeks away. Now it was time to let Greg play himself. With my new contract locked in, I walked into Greg's office on a Friday afternoon and handed him my physical resignation letter. I gave him a standard, professional 2-week notice. Greg looked at the paper, and a look of pure, arrogant triumph washed over his face. He thought he had successfully bullied me out of the company, leaving him with total control and no one left to challenge his authority. Instead of being professional, Greg decided to power trip one last time. He smirked, tossed my letter into the trash can, and said, "You know what? We don't need your 2 weeks. Your attitude has been toxic lately anyway. Pack your things. You're terminated immediately. Security will escort you out. This was the absolute jackpot. If he had accepted my 2-week notice, I would have been legally obligated to spend those 2 weeks transitioning my knowledge and handing over system access. By terminating me on the spot, he legally severed my employment contract at that exact second. I looked at him, smiled, and said, "Understood, Greg. Just to be clear, you are terminating my employment effective immediately, and I am no longer authorized to touch or maintain any company assets." Greg scoffed. "Yes, get out of my sight." I walked out to my car, pulled out my personal laptop, and connected to my cell phone hotspot. I didn't hack anything. I didn't delete a single file. I simply logged into my personal GitHub repository and revoked the active software license for the proprietary database optimization scripts that I owned. Without those optimization scripts constantly running in the background to clean up memory leaks and balance server loads, the company's bloated, legacy database architecture had a lifespan of roughly 72 hours before it would completely choke on its own data traffic and collapse. By Monday morning, the cracks began to show. Because Greg had security sprint me out of the building, no one else on the IT team had the master root passwords to the primary backup arrays, nor did they understand how to manually clear the database cache. At 9 a.m. on Monday, the main logistics tracking system slowed to a crawl. By noon, regional warehouses couldn't print shipping manifests. By Tuesday morning, the entire global database went completely dark. The company was losing an estimated $150,000 every single hour the system was offline. My phone started blowing up. First, it was Greg leaving furious, screaming voicemails demanding that I log back in and fix the glitch. I blocked his number. Then, the corporate attorney called. I answered calmly and gave them the contact information for my intellectual property lawyer. My lawyer sent the company a formal cease and desist letter, accompanied by a copy of my original employment contract and the timestamped logs, proving that the code keeping their entire network alive was my personal property. The letter stated that any attempt to reverse engineer or utilize my proprietary code without an active employment contract would result in an immediate federal copyright lawsuit. By Wednesday morning, the CEO himself bypassed Greg entirely and called me from his personal cell phone. He was panicked. He offered to hire me back as an independent consultant at a staggering rate of $300 an hour, just to get the system online. I agreed, but with 3 strict conditions. First, the consultation agreement had to be fully paid up front via a $15,000 retainer. Second, I would only communicate directly with the CEO. Third, Greg had to be removed from the IT department entirely. The CEO didn't even hesitate. He wired the money within 30 minutes. I hopped onto a brief Zoom call with the remaining IT staff, provided the necessary structural workarounds to safely reboot the framework without using my proprietary code, and stabilize the network. During the next board meeting, an internal audit revealed the full extent of Greg's incompetence. They realized he had absolutely no idea how the department functioned, had actively falsified performance reviews to alienate senior staff, and his arrogant firing of me had cost the company nearly $1 million in downtime and legal fees. Greg was fired for gross negligence before the week was over. His corporate career was completely destroyed, and he was blacklisted from every major tech firm in the region. Meanwhile, I used my $15,000 upfront retainer to pay off my remaining student loans, took a beautiful 2-week vacation, and started my brand new, higher-paying remote job the following Monday.